The Biden administration has announced a list of the first 10 drugs Medicare will negotiate prices on. It includes blood thinners and medications that treat conditions like diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. The Inflation Reduction Act gave Medicare the authority to negotiate drug prices for enrollees last year. Negotiated prices won't take effect until 2026. The Department of Health and Human Services says Medicare enrollees paid $3.4 billion out of pocket for medications last year. Here with me now is Dr. Sheehy. She is the Senior Medical Director of Population Health at UW Health and a Professor of Medicine within the UW School of Medicine and Public Health. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
So first off, why was drug price negotiation prohibited before now?
Well, that's a great question. When the prescription drug law was passed in 2003, there was a non-interference clause passed with that law, likely due to pressures, political pressures. And so that was just how that law was written. And it's taken us 20 years for Congress to write a new law that actually permits Medicare to negotiate drugs.
So this is a significant milestone then. So why these 10 drugs to start with?
Yeah, so these 10 drugs were selected. The law allows CMS to negotiate 10 drugs this year and more drugs in subsequent years. But these drugs specifically had to be high spend drugs, so CMS wanted to save a lot of money for the Medicare program. And so these 10 drugs tended to be highly utilized drugs. These drugs account for about 20% of the Medicare overall spend for prescription drugs. They also had to be drugs that had been on the market for at least 9 years, so pharmaceutical industries had a chance to recoup some R&D from the drugs. And these drugs also were not allowed to have a significant generic competitor.
How often are Medicare beneficiaries foregoing their medications because of the price?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we know that about 25% of Medicare beneficiaries every year say that's difficult for them to purchase their medications, and about 1 out of 5 actually forgoes taking their medications because they simply can't afford that. And that's really, no matter how good a medication is, if a beneficiary can't pay for it, that drug just won't work for them.
So on the outset, for just regular Americans, regular Wisconsinites, this seems like a really positive thing for them to potentially be able to afford their medications a little more easily, but this is also really controversial. Right now, the drug industry and its supporters are really determined to get this effort withdrawn. So far, lawsuits against it have been unsuccessful, but that's as of now. Should people be taking this news with a grain of salt? So in other words, should they be getting really excited about this or maybe hold off a little?
I think the law is very well written, and I think it will withhold challenges. Obviously, industry has a right to sue, but I think that for the most part, this law will go into effect. The Secretary has started to negotiate these prices for these drugs, and I would anticipate that it will move forward as anticipated.
Is there a concern that drug makers would pull their products from the market if they can't agree upon a price with CMS?
That's not likely to happen because Medicare is such a huge part of the market for beneficiaries. Drug makers do have the choice to not go into this negotiation process with the Secretary, but it's not anticipated that any will do so because they would lose so much business in selling their drug. So they do have to sign an agreement to negotiate in good faith with Medicare, and it's anticipated that all 10 drugs and all those companies selected will actually enter into negotiation.
So will drug price negotiation actually hurt the development of new and novel drugs, especially for people who might have a rare disease?
Well, that's a great question. And obviously, as a physician, I want to make sure that new drugs are coming to market. But there's two things with that question. First is what we've talked about with access. And the fact is that this bill will actually reduce drug prices for more beneficiaries. It will allow them to actually purchase drugs. So a new drug is no good to a person if they can't afford to take it. But the second part that's really important here is there's been a lot of investigation in this area, and nonpartisan sources have looked at this. Will drugs, new drugs drop off? And the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office assessed this, and they found that there was virtually no impact on new drugs coming to market. The pharmaceutical industry also, it's been highly studied, and the House Committee on Oversight and Reform looked at the years 2016 to 2020 and where the pharmaceutical industry was spending their dollars. And they found that they were spending $56 billion more on stock buybacks and dividends to their shareholders than they were on research and development. So if pharma thought that they didn't have enough to put forth to research and development, they could certainly have the option to adjust their finances.
Dr. Ann Sheehy, thank you so much for being here and putting this new announcement into context for us.
Thank you for having me.